In the last, especially the last 4 years or so, we've been again back on a kind of a growth trajectory. As an industry, we are right now it's about $600 million in revenue. The billion-dollar target that we set for 2016, I believe, still something that we can achieve. Provided that certain key drivers are addressed, right? And I think that if you look at what's driving growth for us or what needs to get done, number one is the supply, right? We really need to ensure that the supply side of the engine kicks up, and our education expands and provides people, because essentially this is a people business, right? Second is the market awareness of Sri Lanka as a destination for IT BPO. While it's been known for many other things, it is not still very top of mind for when somebody thinking about looking at global sourcing destination for their company, right? So there's a lot more has to be done to position Sri Lanka as a destination. There has been some work done with A.T. Kearney and so forth. Compared to what our competition is doing in other emerging countries, I think we are probably a little behind on that. A lot more needs to be done on the marketing and positioning the country side. Third is, maybe the third or fourth is really more around when you position, how do you position in terms of your incentives, and how do you try to attract, and we see even some of the remote US cities are now coming up with some very attractive proposition for companies, including paying their rent, giving some salaries for first couple of years, first 6 months to 3 months salary, so their employees, if you locate their center in one of their states. So we need to start getting competitive now in some of those incentives. While we have a great tax incentive scheme, a lot of the countries are now going beyond tax to come up with other strategies to attract companies. At a national level, we need to really start thinking about those things as well. So those are some of the basic things, and things like electricity and telecom are kind of, if you look at regionally, we're slightly high on that. So those play, when you get to scale, those become challenges for companies, not at startup stage, but certainly when a large global player is evaluating a country, they look at some of these as a significant costs, which are right now high compared to our competitor countries. From a country point of view, we still are significantly advantageous for companies who are looking at setting up in Asia, what we call India plus one. Many companies, India is the default place, and when people look at diversification strategy, when you're looking at a strategy that they want to look at smaller, in India, tier 3 cities, then, plus one scale, we are really very high from that point of view. So that's a quick backdrop. We've seen also a very positive trend of new entrepreneurs coming up, especially the last 3 to 4 years. We're really seeing a marked increase in new IT ventures starting up by the entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka, which is a great trend. I think something that we need to nurture and push and put spotlight on, so that people really follow that path, because this is one of the industries that you can really create a significant wealth and jobs in a lifetime of an individual, right? If you look at the top 10 companies in the globe, 6 or 7 would be IT or related companies, right? So the potential is huge. We need to tap into that. If you think about what I mean by IT adoption, or if you define a little bit more broadly, are we using IT to deliver services? Are we using IT to communicate? If you look at that picture, it's predominantly depend on two things. One is, do you have access to technology and connectivity, right? The second is, do we have capability to use that? Even if you have access, are you capable of using those technology? So if you're at the base level, while IT literacy number might be whatever the number that we're talking about, 30%. If you look at the people who would be using some of these services, the younger generation, of either people coming out of school or just a young millennial type of people, I think in that group you don't have to teach them literacy, right? I mean, they will, you give them a phone, you give them a tab, they'll figure this out, right? So I'm not so seriously worried about the literacy part, right? Maybe at the senior levels, people who are 40 plus years would have challenges in using government services on internet and so forth. There is more work to be done, but I think literacy wouldn't stop us from adopting IT in the strictest sense. Right? But if you look at access, that might be the more of the do we have the right bandwidth? Do we have the right technology? Do we have it at the right price point, so that a lot more people have accessibility to technology and services? And when that happens, you will find a lot more services comes up, right? Where a lot more entrepreneurs will now build services around. It will be a good sign to see whether the IT has gone to the across the country, when you find entrepreneurs coming up and doing services which is very specific to Sri Lanka, right? Whether it's delivering service, whether it's coming up and providing online
antiques and all these things that are culturally relevant.
That's right, and then that's a really a good indicator. And you've seen some of that happening. Some of the systems that if you think about some of the entrepreneurs who are using IT to drive services like Ikman.lk to anything.lk to Takas, and you can see 5 years ago we didn't have this stuff, right? You really start seeing some of this stuff, and those companies won't last that long unless there is a market and there is a user base that's growing user base. And if you look at Facebook, for example, I think we have over 1 million Facebook users. Largely many of them might be on the phone, but that's an indication of adoption will happen. Adoption will happen, I would say, faster than we would think. Right? So in terms of driving capacity, what the companies can do, obviously, large part of one of the big challenge for capacity is having a good quality teachers, right? Having otherwise, while the rate of expansion can happen at the rate of good quality, teaching can expand, right? So I think there's a role that the private sector needs to play in terms of giving back to that education engine, if you like, getting back, providing that incentives to people to stay in the universities. Given the big disparity in salaries and so forth, we rapidly lose some of the best brains out of the education system, right? That has a long-term negative impact on the quality of what people that comes out, right? If our best people doesn't get involved in some level of teaching and building a system, then it becomes an issue. And best people are largely in companies, so we need to really have a responsibility to get back. And many other progressive companies are doing that, right? And getting back and helping the universities and putting back into curriculum and things like that. Again, it's also industry which changes rapidly, so the industry and education system has to work very closely. Unlike some of the other traditional industries, which the changes happens fairly longer cycles, so you don't need that level of connect to be able to stay relevant, right? Here, if the academia is not connected with the industry, in 5 years you can become irrelevant, right? So that's a very important aspect. So that's I believe what the private sector needs to do, and really have almost a very strategic CSR focus to give back to the education systems to produce more, right? Unless we bootstrap that process, it'll be a growing challenge for us. The second piece around the private sector, which is really IT adoption in the country for doing more efficient business, right? Driving competition, driving costs down, bringing more efficiencies. I think there's a lot more to be done. If you compare to the potential of what technology can bring to an enterprise, our SME sector probably can leverage a lot more, right, in terms of using technology. and you will find with a lot of the millennials or with the younger generation people getting into workforce as well as becoming the consumers, they will start demanding stuff that the previous consumers hasn't been, right? Now anybody who comes out of school or university, they are very conversant with technology, right? And they would start demanding the same, especially a young 25, 26-year-old guy who's coming out of university would hardly think about going to a bank and staying in a queue to do banking, right? They would naturally think about, I want to do banking on my phone, right? Think about any other service that they would want to. If I want to book a restaurant, I really want to do that on my phone. If I want to find out some information about the government services or the tax you have to pay or something like that, they will always look for these services in that because they're exposed to a very global experience base as opposed to the previous generation, which is probably had a more local experience, right? So I think that millennial generation will push most of the companies also to adopt some of these services, right? Because they will not tolerate more traditional services. So the companies who adopt a digital way of working quicker will have a heads up as most of the millennials get to the workforce and get to the consumer, become a large portion of the consumers.